Hey guys, my name is Catherine. Thank you for joining me again for another episode of Missing the Missing. In this episode, number 25, we're going to be talking about Aju Iroaga. First of all, I would just like to prefix this episode by saying I am not familiar with Nigerian language or dialect. My pronunciation is probably really off. I do apologise. I just wanted to let you all know I am trying my best and I will do so with respect. Also, this case was recommended probably over 3 years ago now by Jenna. So thank you, Jenna, for bringing Aju Iroaga's case to my attention. Aju Iroaga was born in Canada on May 17, 1980, to his father Nwab and his mother Nkechi. Nwab came to Canada from Nigeria in 1968, teaching psychology at the University of Waterloo, before moving on to teach organisational behaviour at Seneca College in Toronto. Nkechi was also a teacher. Nwab and Nkechi were born in Nigeria, part of the Igbo culture, to whom children were considered to be the greatest blessing. The Iroagas had 4 children prior to Aju, and all had their fair share of success. Their eldest was a son named Iche, who earned a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University. Then came 3 daughters, Ijena and Uchenwa, who are pharmacists, and Ozi, who worked in marketing and is an author. By the time Aju, the youngest, came around, the family felt incredibly blessed, showcasing that feeling in the naming of their son. Chukuri means presence of God. Aju held both Nigerian and Canadian citizenship, the family opting to split their time between Nigeria and Canada, considering both countries to be home. At primary school in Nigeria, he did well and was happy, though sadly, Aju wouldn't quite achieve the same level of success as his siblings, his life seeming to take a different path after moving back to Canada. At junior high school, he experienced bullying due to his slim figure, reserved nature, and Nigerian accent, leaving him sad and lonely. Nwab remembers Aju becoming short-tempered, quick to fire, and asking him once, "Why did you bring me to Canada?" Aju's temper flared at high school, resulting in a fight over basketball in the school gym. The police attended, but no drastic action was taken. This may have been a wake-up call of sorts for Aju. Not wanting to bring any shame on his family, and perhaps wanting to achieve a level of success of his siblings, Aju focused intently on his studies after this incident. School was important to him. He applied himself well and secured good grades, achieving offers of admission to several universities, including the McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, where he would go on to study chemical engineering. However, in his second year, a fight erupted in Aju's dorm, resulting in a conviction for assault and a month in jail. Perhaps this incident set Aju back, knocked his confidence, or made him question his path in life. He went on to work odd jobs here and there, including tree planting, doing some soul searching, and saving money to return to his father's village in Nigeria, of which he had fond memories. He acknowledged his anger issues, taking anger management classes, learning new coping mechanisms to control his outbursts. He took up yoga and meditation, clearing his headspace. He improved his health and physical and mental well-being by becoming vegetarian and began long-distance running and composing music to combat his anger. Aju was close to his family, ultimately living with his sister Uchenwa in Richmond Hill for a while before he moved further north. He appeared to enjoy spending time in nature and cared about others, and for his home in Nigeria. In 2006, Aju spent some months in his family's Nigerian village, where there is no running water. His father explained of Aju's personality. "My son would go out very early in the morning with a wheelbarrow and go to the stream and fetch water, not only for our own use, but fetch water for poor people, for old women." In spring of the same year, 2006, Aju returned early from his trip to Nigeria to take up his tree planting job for A&M Reforestation Company for the second year running to earn money for his third-year tuition fees. He was experienced in the field, knowing the job well, having completed a placement the summer prior, planting black spruce and jack pine seedlings. By this time, Aju's family believed that, despite his earlier unhappiness and trouble with finding direction, he finally appeared to be turning his life around and getting back on track, perhaps being refreshed and grounded after his trip home. Aju arrived in Sudbury, Ontario, before heading north to White River and subsequently on to the bush just off the northeast coast of Lake Superior. He was isolated from his family, being approximately a 14-hour drive to his parents' apartment in East End, Toronto, and about 70 kilometres along gravel roads and highway to the nearest town. He was fit and trained as a distance runner, though regardless, Aju's family acknowledged that he was impulsive, he can be very short-tempered, and he will throw a punch. At the time of his disappearance, Aju was described as a 25-year-old black male with a dark complexion and an athletic build. He was 183 centimetres, or 6 feet tall, and weighed approximately 83 kilograms, or about 180 pounds. He had black hair and dark eyes that have been described both as black and brown. He was last seen wearing a green hooded camouflage sweatshirt, blue denim jeans, brown leather running shoes, a black woolen toque hat, and a black brimmed tilly hat. Aju is a Canadian citizen of Nigerian origin with a Nigerian accent. On Monday, May 15th, 2006, it is believed that Aju Iroaga went about his usual business. Though it can't specifically be verified on this day, he usually ran approximately 30 kilometres along logging roads in the vicinity before leaving the Crocker Lake base camp at 7 a.m. for work. We do know that Aju went into work as usual. It was 2 days before his 26th birthday, and 2 days after he had arrived back in Canada from Nigeria. It was his second day on the job, albeit a job he had done before. It is suggested that Aju and his supervisor argued loudly on the bus on the way to the job site, though for what reason is unknown. Whilst planting trees that morning, Aju's supervisor criticised his work, ordering him to replant the trees that he planted that day and the day prior. Frustrated, Aju did so, but was again criticised and ordered to replant them. This time, however, Aju refused. We can only imagine how he must have felt, a third-year engineering student from an academically gifted family, having returned from a place he was passionate about to take this job just 2 days before. Perhaps that's why it's reported that Aju quit his job on the spot around midday. Aju requested the company provide transportation back to the main camp, Crocker Lake Base Camp, between 65 and 70 kilometres away, so that he could collect his possessions before travelling on the remaining 8 to 10 kilometres to White River. Despite multiple vehicles being available on site for reforestation staff to use for routine activities, however, supervisors refused. Aju was allegedly instead told to wait at a nearby remote intersection of logging roads until after the working day at 6 p.m, when the remaining crew would return to the camp together on the scheduled company buses. Aju is described to have thrown down his shovel, his tree planting bag, his high-visibility vest, his hard hat and his work boots, before lacing up his brown leather running shoes and walking away. Aju was seen at the intersection several times by former reforestation colleagues over the course of that afternoon. He waved and gave thumbs up to them as they passed. Some sources claim this was upwards of 10 times over the 4 hours after he quit and was seen around the logging roads. The times of last sightings vary, but most tend to agree that Aju was last seen between 3:45 and 4 p.m, walking alone up a logging road. Some reports claim that this could be as late as 4:30. This is where lack of local knowledge becomes a bit of an issue. Some reports state that Aju was last seen on Domtar Road 100, also known as Danny Lake Road, in Bayfield Township, Lake Rampike. Further reports state that he was last seen on Road 300, and others still suggest that he was last seen between 66 and 70 kilometres north of White River, just off Highway 631. The problem with these locations is that they don't seem to make sense. Unless there is another Domtar road, this location is too far south. I can't find a Road 300. Danny Lake Road is recognised and does appear to be in the general vicinity, though Lake Rampike is significantly further north again, and although Highway 631 runs to White River, it's too far south and east for Aju's suspected last known location. I believe, from the information available and from personal research, that Aju was last seen in the vicinity of Danny Lake Road, which is about 60 kilometres from the town of White River via the roads and not as the crow flies. Either way, between 4:05 and 4:15, however, he was no longer seen at the logging road by passing crews, nor was he present at 6 p.m. when the company bus approached and passed, transporting the remaining crew back to Crocker Lake Base Camp. It is suggested that between 6:15 and 9:30, A&M reforestation supervisors searched for Aju, driving around the area, sounding their horn and calling out for Aju with no response. Meanwhile, at 8 p.m, A&M reforestation colleagues finally contacted the Ontario Provincial Police, OPP, in White River to report Aju as missing. Sources note that law enforcement arrived on scene at either 9 p.m. or sometime between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. I'm unsure for the reason for this discrepancy, though it may be that they first attended at the Crocker Lake Base Camp to speak with colleagues and take details for the initial MISPA report before heading on up to the logging road about an hour's drive away to start the search. Again, sources disagree as to when the searches commenced. Some note that at this time it was too dark to commit to a full search in the forested area, and that they instead notified the emergency response team and planned to conduct an extensive search the following day. Others, however, suggest that a search was conducted that evening, albeit cursory, which lasted for 4 hours. The searches were somewhat hampered from the beginning, with OPP Detective Sergeant Jeff Bangman noting that 5 hours had passed between when Aju was last sighted and when police were called in, but he told the Iroaga family not to lose hope. The weather was damp and it was dark in a vast area of bushland riddled with lakes, and whilst DS Jeff Bangman claimed that there was no evidence to suggest that Aju had wandered off, Constable Karen Farrand also claimed that foul play was not suspected. Whether this suggests the police belief that an accident had occurred is anyone's guess. Aju's former colleagues and police were also reported to have driven around the area, sounding their horns and calling his name after he disappeared, with 2 colleagues and 1 officer allegedly spending the night in their vehicles at the location where he had been waiting earlier that day, but no trace of Aju was located. At first light on May 16th, 18 emergency response team officers and 7 volunteers from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, began an extensive ground and air search for Aju, which lasted all day and into the evening. There is no mention of a water search, but the search covered the remote logging area where Aju was last seen, including the main access road that links to Highway 17 and a number of nearby forestry access roads. 3 helicopters were brought in to assist the search, including 2 from Aurelia and a 3rd piloted by a volunteer from Wawa. Paul Thasuska, General Manager of A&M Reforestation, also claimed to have rented a helicopter to assist in the search for Aju. 3 search dog units were also deployed to help with the search for Aju. Greg Latham, lead investigator, brought in canines from Sault Ste. Marie, Kirkland Lake, and Sudbury to try and identify a trail or a direction of travel. It's not clear what type of canine units these were, whether cadaver dogs or sniffer dogs, but I suspect the latter, given the short time that Aju was known to have been missing at this point. It's likely the dogs were able to get Aju's scent from his high-vis vest and work boots, though as we know, DS Jeff Bangma confirmed that police had no proof that Aju had wandered away, saying, as far as we know, nobody saw Aju walk off. nobody knows what direction he went in. Although online sources claim that no trail of Aju was picked up by the dogs, Bangma and his colleague, Detective Sergeant or Constable Shelley Pastorek, did not confirm to the family one way or another. Police conducted 2 searches of the area where Aju was last seen, but neither choppers, dogs, nor human units found any trace of Aju. Greg Latham also reached out to the Toronto Police Service to trace Aju's next of kin contact details, with Nwab Iroaga receiving the devastating news of his son's disappearance by telephone at either 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. Sources differ, on Wednesday, May 17th. Crucially, officers in receipt of the initial missing persons report didn't secure a scene, potentially resulting in the loss or contamination of valuable evidence. This isn't necessarily unusual though, because at the time no foul play was suspected and it was feasible to believe that Aju had left of his own accord. Officers later reattended the area where Aju had last been seen to find that the tree planting company had cleared their camp and left the area, possibly removing or damaging evidence in the process. Due to the fact that official interviews were not conducted immediately, lines of inquiry may have been lost with the dispersal of the planting crew. It is reported that none of the officers involved with Aju's case have interviewed any of the tree planters present the day he disappeared, and have advised that they will not be doing so in the future unless further information comes to light suggesting interviews are necessary. Early in the investigation, Jeff Bangma was said to have given conflicting information to the Iroagas regarding the status of the investigation. Initially, he allegedly assured the family that he planned to continue identifying and interviewing people that were present when Aju disappeared, to include approximately 15 of Aju's crew members who were working with him at the time. Later on, however, Bangma also claimed that he and his colleague, Shelley Pastorek, were only attempting to trace an interview between 5 and 7 main witnesses. Of those 5 or 7, only 2 had been interviewed, and Bangma explained that he had not yet received the list of planters on Aju's crew that day from A&M Reforestation despite requests. Given the fact that it has now been many years since Aju disappeared, however, it would certainly be advisable for interviews to be conducted. Information suggests that there would have been between 45 to 50 people at the site on the day in question. Rest assured, said Bangma early on, we will track these people down. Aju's supervisor at the time, Kathy McPherson, was spoken to by Detective Sergeants Bangma and Pastorek, though not until October of the following year, and denied any argument having taken place, despite the fact that 2 had been reported to have occurred between her and Aju that very day. It is also unclear whether A&M Reforestation provided any training or safety information to Aju or any of the other tree planters. Aju had only been in the area for 2 days, although he had worked for the company previously, but since he was planting trees on both his first and second day, it leads one to believe there was very little time for training of this nature. What safety precautions were in place, if any, and what precautions the tree planters were aware of remains unknown. Speaking on the policy in question, General Manager Paul Fasuska explained, "Our policy is to drive somebody to town where there's a phone, a hotel, and a bus that comes by," adding Iroaga was aware of the policy. On Friday, May 19th, Aju's father travelled to White River with his son and Aju's brother Iche following the next day. "I wanted to see the place for myself," he said. The Iroagas met OPP officers, including lead investigator Greg Latham. They also went on to meet with the 3 managers of A&M Reforestation, along with their general manager, Paul Fasuska. The Iroagas were given a single, joint statement from the managers, who said that Aju had quit and walked off, ignoring their advice to wait for the bus back to camp. Paul Fasuska further stated that Aju was asked to sit on a bus, presumably to wait, and also offered a ride in another vehicle, but declined. After just a couple of days with no leads, Nwab and Iche left White River with heavy hearts. "I was so confused. I couldn't even think properly to ask the right questions," said a downtrodden Nwab. Later, Aju's property that had been stored in his locker at Crocker Lake Base Camp was returned to his family. It is unclear whether these possessions had been taken into police custody at any time, or whether they had been removed by A&M reforestation staff when they cleared their camp and departed the area. It has also not been released whether the locker was, in fact, locked, and if so, if there was a spare key, and who may have had access to it if so. His property included his clothes, his social insurance card, both his Canadian and Nigerian passports, his driving licence, his keys, and a weathered black wallet. One source also claims that Aju's phone calling card was found with his belongings at camp. I am unsure whether this was for use at a payphone, on a landline, or whether Aju was in possession of a mobile telephone, though no other mention has been made of one. Aju's work boots were also returned to his family, minus their laces, though it has been explained that Aju removed these laces to tie his running shoes with. It is unclear where the boots were located, or whether they had remained in the possession of A&M Reforestation Management after Aju removed them. Aju's steel planting shovel that he had newly purchased has never been located, unusual considering this should have been with his boots. According to police, Aju did not have his shovel with him when he was waiting for the bus, and there is no mention at all of his high-vis vest. Notes made at the time by A&M Reforestation Manager John Ritter were found and said simply, "No sign, vanished." It has not been released whether any other notes relating to Aju and the day of his vanishing exist, though if he had indeed quit, one would assume there was a more substantial report of the day somewhere in the HR records. Similarly, if there had been 2 instances of alleged poor quality work being conducted by Aju, which had escalated to the point of heated discussion and which needed to be addressed by management, there could, and perhaps even should, potentially also be at least informal disciplinary notes. Any notes made by Kathy McPherson, with whom Aju had allegedly argued that day, have never been addressed. Where, or even if they are, is unknown. It certainly appears like A&M Reforestation were keen to wash their hands of Aju and distance themselves from his case. No information has been released concerning Aju's computer or telephone use, whether he owned either, and what the contents of them revealed, if anything. The McMaster University has come under criticism for not acknowledging Aju's disappearance, when it is alleged that in other cases of things happening to students, the university issues a statement to the public and student population. The Iroaga family requested a coroner's inquest into Aju's disappearance. However, this was denied by the Ontario Provincial Government. The family instructed legal representatives, Ruby and Edward, now Goldblatt partners, as well as hiring private investigative firm Integra Investigation Services Limited, both in Toronto, Ontario, though neither have been able to shed any light on Aju's disappearance. The Nigerian High Commission has also expressed concerns that Aju's disappearance has not been solved. The official search for Aju was suspended on May 23, 2006. On June 22, 2006, the Iroaga family hired private investigators Integra Investigation Services. They were tasked by the family with retracing the steps taken by the OPP throughout the investigation, in the hopes of uncovering new evidence. Their findings were provided to the Iroaga family on August 25th of the same year, though did not provide any answers. Between September 2006 and August 2007, Aju's father began petitioning the OPP to reopen their investigation, although the case was not known to be officially closed. Nwab wrote to Detective Constable Michael Mayville, who assisted lead investigator Greg Latham early in the investigation. Sadly, there was no reply. The Iroagas then submitted a Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy request, applying for Aju's case file notes, but the application was denied. On what basis is unclear, but it may have been because it was still an active investigation at the time. In February 2007, the OPP decided to reopen the stagnant investigation with Detective Sergeant Jeff Bangma spearheading the drive. The Iroaga family were not informed, however, until the summer of that year. In mid-June of 2007, the Iroaga family enlisted support from the Nigerian community of Toronto and the general Canadian public in an attempt to raise the profile on Aju's case. They petitioned to meet with Ontario's Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services, Monty Quinter, to discuss the case, though he declined to meet with the Iroagas, citing the need to avoid interfering in police investigations. Quinter did write to the Iroagas in mid-June, noting, "It must be particularly difficult for you when your son's fate remains unknown," though he also expressed his confidence in the OPP investigation, explaining that they had conducted an exhaustive and comprehensive search and that he had every confidence that the OPP will investigate any new leads that are brought to his attention. Still in June, Nwab began to email Detective Sergeant Jeff Bangma of the OPP's Sault Ste. Marie Crime Prevention and Investigation Unit, where he found out about the reopening of the case. On August 14, 2007, Nwab and Nkechi met with Reader's Digest for a lengthy article on Aju's case. On September 4, 2007, Detective Sergeants Bangma and DC Pastorek also spoke with Reader's Digest, where Bangma claimed that there was no evidence of any connection between Aju's history of violence and his disappearance. Bangma also suggested a different version of events than the family were portraying, explaining, "Actually, when Mr. Iroaga and his son arrived on the scene, they said they kind of thought they were wasting our time because there was no doubt in their minds that Aju had walked out to the highway and was either at home or on his way home and would probably stay very low profile for a while, simply because he'd be embarrassed the police were making this big fuss." The Iroaga family deny this, with Aju's brother Ichie responding, "They are the experts, and for them to say that now, they're trying to cover up the decisions they made." The Iroaga family's request for an official coroner's inquest into the disappearance of Aju was denied by the Ontario Provincial Government. On November 17, 2006, Newmarket Aurora Progressive Conservative Provincial Representative MPP Frank Cleese became aware of the case during a meeting with Nwab Iroaga. Writing to the OPP Commissioner Julian Fantino, Cleese asked for the investigation to be reopened, raising concerns about the original police investigation. "Having considered Mr. Iroaga's comments at some length, I find myself to be in full agreement with his grounds for appeal, especially given the fact that a number of individuals who were, without a doubt, among the last to have seen Aju alive have apparently yet to provide, with full clarity, the details surrounding their final contact with Aju." However, the OPP responded explaining that the investigation was already open and that officers would continue to follow up on any leads. Cleese, however, went on to explain, "But there is no evidence that an active and thorough investigation was really ever undertaken. On behalf of Aju Iroaga's family, we're calling on the government to direct the Chief Coroner's Office to conduct a full inquest. We believe that an inquest by the Chief Coroner's Office would have the jurisdictional authority to investigate all of the circumstances relating to this matter and more, and will hopefully not only bring closure for the Iroaga family, but will also serve to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future." By mid-December 2007, the Iroaga family are offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to Aju. On January 6, 2008, Nwab Iroaga, who was by this time chief of his Nigerian village, and Ms. Edwardh, legal representative, held a conference call with senior officers of the OPP where it was disclosed that police now consider Aju to be deceased. No evidence has been found to suggest that Aju walked away of his own accord, and equally no evidence of foul play had been uncovered. The Iroaga family now hope that a coroner's inquest can be held into Aju's presumed death, but this has not occurred as of 2022. According to legal representative Ms. Edwardh, the OPP acknowledged during that call that Aju is likely dead, which Detective Sergeant Jeff Bangma also revealed to Reader's Digest, explaining that he was continuing to trace clues and witnesses due to the fact that, unfortunately, we are looking for a body now. Edward responded, "If there is no evidence of foul play, and no evidence that he left, that leaves you with an unacceptable mystery. I am not satisfied that the door to foul play can be closed." On the 21st of April 2008, an event was held at Queen's Park Legislative Building in Toronto, Canada, where lawyers would address attendees on the status of the investigation. Lawyers explained that they had petitioned the Ontario government to launch investigations into the case, and that both an inquest by Ontario's chief coroner and a probe by the Ministry of Labour are necessary due to the many unanswered questions concerning the apparent death of Aju Iroaga. "People do not just vanish," she said. "How, where, when, and by what means Aju died are still open questions that require answers." Ontario's Associate Deputy Chief Coroner, Dr. William Lucas, also reported as Dr. Laws, was assigned by the Coroner of Ontario to conduct a preliminary investigation to determine whether the inquest is necessary. Edward explained that a coroner's inquest is indeed necessary in Aju's case, since all of the questions that would be answered in an inquest remain open in Aju's case. Specifically, when, where, why, and how Aju supposedly died. Furthermore, a coroner's inquest would also require the OPP to reveal the contents of their investigative file, which they have to date repeatedly declined to do. This could allow the family to progress the matter in civil courts in the absence of criminal jurisdiction. Lucas, or Laos, confirmed that the coroner's office was considering the new call for an inquest, and the matter is currently under review. As part of the review, the office plans to meet with the OPP to discuss the case, although a decision on whether or not to hold an inquest could take months. I'm unable to find any update as of 2022, leading me to believe that the decision was negative. On the 16th of May 2008, it appears that students at the McMaster University got wind of Aju's disappearance and rallied together to raise awareness of his case. A Facebook group was set up to spread the word. On the 21st of May 2008, a social media post noted that "It's good the Supreme Court has ruled them having to find him. However, I've been unable to verify this information and can find no records relating to Aju's case on either the Supreme Court of Canada or Nigerian websites." On the 27th of June 2008, students at the McMaster University held a fundraiser for Aju's case at Torburn Banquet Hall in Mississauga, Ontario. In 2018, I found information to suggest that Nwab Iroaga may have sadly passed away between the years of 2016 and 2018, never knowing what happened to his son. The status of Aju's mother, Nkechi, is unknown. She is not known to have been active on social media since 2017. Aju is survived by his siblings and has nieces and nephews that miss him. The theories in this case, as with most others, can be summed up in 4 different categories. The first is suicide, the second being that Aju left of his own accord, the third being an accident, and the fourth and final being that foul play was involved. So let's look at these theories one by one and analyse the evidence for each. The first is the possibility that Aju took his own life. We know that Aju's life was not necessarily on the same track as the rest of his family. Now, that's not a problem at all. We are each entitled to our own individuality, and living in the shadow of siblings can be difficult and frustrating, undermining the value we can feel in ourselves and each other. However, if Aju felt like a failure, he could potentially have made a drastic decision. He had a criminal record at this point for violence, having been involved in more than one incident which called for police attendance, and he acknowledged that he struggled with his rage, although granted he was trying to deal with this. He felt alone at times and became withdrawn, according to family. An alleged friend on social media, Delmaribe Young, claimed there was estrangement within the family, stating, "What I know is my brother didn't like his mum no more. Said while in jail, mum didn't pay him no visits." This suggests potential drama in the home. The Reader's Digest article also suggests the same. When discussing her older children, Nkechi's face lit up, though darkened at the mention of Aju. Perhaps this could simply be grief that he's missing, or perhaps there were relationship issues, and maybe even guilt. He wasn't enjoying life in Canada as we know it. He felt out of place and seemed to prefer his Nigerian village. He was physically isolated from his relatives, which could have made him feel alone in a time of need. His work was seasonal, and we have no indication of any friendships he had in Canada, although Nigerian comrades have expressed their feelings since his disappearance. There is no suggestion that he was in a relationship. He had travelled back early from his beloved Nigeria in order to take his tree planting job, only to be told on his second day that, despite doing the job before, in effect, he wasn't good enough. These emotions could have compounded, and it is possible he may have snapped. I researched a paper called "The Perception of Suicide in Igbo Religion, a Study in African Traditional Suicidology," written by Reverend Father Christian O. Ellie, PhD. Whilst I have no information relating to Aju's specific religious beliefs, working on the basis of what I know about his love of Nigeria and how he felt at home and was raised there, I needed to explore this concept in more detail. I'd like to prefix this section by explaining that I have very little knowledge of the Igbo culture, and I'm simply doing my best to research using published papers online and no personal experience, with a view to understanding the effects of that culture on these theories and therefore their probability. According to this paper, suicide, or Igbo Onwe, the voluntary and intentional act of self-destruction or self-murder in the Igbo worldview, disrupts and disturbs the ontological order. It is a crime offensive to God, the Creator, the Earth Goddess, and the ancestors in Igbo religion. The findings of this paper show that suicide is an abomination in Igbo religion. However, the same research also concluded that suicide for altruistic reasons are considered heroic and are celebrated by the Igbo. In some instances, the Igbo judicial process and traditional authority can approve, force, or advise suicidal options for criminals who injuriously violate the social harmony of individuals and communities. Could Aju have felt that, given his history of violence, his criminal record, and the potential for shame to have been brought to his family, that suicide was the best option? I'd like to emphasise, however, that even this paper recommends the need to uphold life as supreme and as precious. Moving on, why would Aju wait 4 hours before doing something of this nature? On the one hand, one could assume he may have been plucking up some sort of courage, making a plan, though on the other hand, we could expect that his will could mellow and his emotions soften, putting him off that drastic course of action. Aju hasn't been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and he allegedly hasn't accessed his bank and email accounts, leading to the belief that he is no longer in a position to do so. It was reported that both police officers and colleagues, bearing in mind he was supposedly waving and offering thumbs up at colleagues all afternoon, drove around the area, sounding their horns and calling Aju's name, even staying in their vehicles all night looking for him, to no avail. It certainly appeared that Aju was either not in the area, not capable of hearing them or responding, or simply didn't want to. 5 hours had passed between when Aju was last seen and police were contacted, longer still until a search was conducted. This leaves plenty of time for Aju to have travelled a great distance, and it is possible that if he intended to take his life, his body may not be found in the huge bushy area. It still doesn't make sense, however, that Aju would wait so long before committing to this act, and even if he did for the reasons we've discussed, why he would have left the area to do so. Having said that, Aju was a young, fit man trained as a long-distance runner and was known to run approximately 30 kilometres each morning before work down those logging roads. So, whilst he may not have been exactly familiar with that specific area where he was last seen, he would certainly have been familiar with the terrain and similar roads. Another spanner in this theory is that, although it's not confirmed one way or another, it is suggested that scent dogs never caught a trail of Aju. We have explained earlier on that this is not necessarily unusual, though had he been on the road for hours, or had his body still been in the same locality, one would certainly assume that he would have been traced by the dogs relatively quickly. I'm not sure of when the helicopters were specifically deployed in the search for Aju, and by that I mean to the hour. According to multiple sources, although it can vary, a human body is generally believed to be cold between 8 to 36 hours after death. If the helicopters that were used in the search were relying on heat-seeking technology but were deployed more than 8 hours after Aju had passed away, no heat signals would be picked up. Moving on, we have the theory that Aju left of his own accord. This category can be subdivided into two further sections and into even further subsections from there. Firstly, there is the possibility that Aju left the area willingly and of sound mind. We know that Aju ran approximately 30 kilometres each morning before work along those roads. We know that he was 2 days shy of his 26th birthday. He was a young, fit man and trained in long-distance running. It is not out of the realm of possibility that Aju attempted to walk or run back to camp or town. Many of the sources who dispute this theory suggest that it is entirely implausible, unreasonable, reckless, and even stupid to attempt such a journey. However, we must remember one thing. In addition to Aju's training, many of the accounts that suggest that this course of action is ridiculous are basing that assessment off the presumption that Aju would have chosen to travel the approximately 66-kilometre route which would take him along the main road and down Highway 17, or the Trans-Canada Highway, into White River, when in fact there is an alternative. Although there are not known to be any specific roads, given Aju's state of mind, arguments with a supervisor, recently departed from Nigeria, and just quit his job which was due to pay his upcoming tuition, and his love of nature, Aju could feasibly have made the decision to travel as the crow flies, so to speak. That is, the approximately 10-mile or 15-kilometre distance directly south, southwest, southeast, depending on where along Danny Lake Road he was, if indeed he was on Danny Lake Road, into White River, or even to the Crocker Lake base camp, which is described as being about 8 or 10 kilometres east of White River. Again, despite there not appearing to be any legitimate roads, Aju may have decided it was possible to travel directly through the brush. Average runners run at a speed of approximately 5 miles an hour, and trained long-distance runners can go at a speed of up to 12 miles an hour. At these rates, it should only have taken Aju either side of an hour to travel the 10 miles to camp or town. Having waited for nearly 4 hours, and with the light potentially beginning to subside, he may have felt like he didn't want to wait for a further 2 hours, that he could instead be back at camp by then, and, confident in his abilities, could have taken his chances. Co-owner of A&M Reforestation, Paul Fasuska, explains, "As Aju's father and I discussed, Aju was certainly strong enough, physically and of will, to take care of himself wherever he were to go." Of course, this is a huge generalisation and not taking account of the potential dangers of terrain and wildlife en route, nor how unprepared Aju may have been. No food, no water, no appropriate clothing, though it does give an additional perspective nonetheless. As we mentioned with the previous theory, however, we need to consider why Aju would have waited for 4 hours before taking off. It is possible he may have acknowledged the recklessness of such an act initially, hence why he chose to wait, but that he got frustrated and that time was dragging. It may be that he saw the light was fading and, knowing the dangers, believed that he could not wait any longer before making his move, making the most of the final daylight. On this point, however, although it was said to be damp that day, research into historical weather patterns in the area for the month of May suggests that daylight is not lost until approximately 9 o'clock. By that token, the same information suggests that the average high temperature is 59 degrees Fahrenheit, or 15 degrees Celsius, and low of 37 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 degrees Celsius, with it generally feeling cold, with a gentle breeze and a chance of rain. With that in mind, the source states most people would dress in something warm like a jacket. We know Aju was simply wearing a hoodie. As an intelligent man, surely this is something he would have considered. During the course of my research into this case, I encountered comments from tree planters who offered their perspective on the matter. None of those comments suggested that leaving of one's own accord was a plausible suggestion. On Sunday, the 21st of May 2006, Klaas Nijenhuis said, "Having planted with this tree company last year, I am surprised that an experienced tree planter would leave on his own. Logging roads all look the same up there, and bears are less than friendly this time of year." And on Friday the 23rd of June 2006, Bobby Orkish said, "I have planted for A&M for 2 seasons and have never seen anyone trying to leave a camp and walk to town." Additionally, Aju's father stated, "He is not a stupid person to wait 4 hours, then take off. If he did take off, why didn't the people look for him? They didn't do that because he didn't walk." Furthermore, co-owner and general manager of A&M Reforestation, Paul Fasuska, said, "I don't know how he got out of the area. My impression is that he made it out. I assume the police investigation was that he got out since they called off the search." Regarding the motivation to leave, the same points are valid here as we discussed in the previous theory, namely, that Aju could have felt like a failure, like he wasn't good enough, or was bringing shame to his family, or couldn't walk in the footsteps carved by his successful siblings. He could have been somewhat estranged from his family, and felt a lack of support and physically isolated and even abandoned. We've noted the accusation that his mother didn't visit him whilst in prison, and have seen the apparent disappointment shine through in the Reader's Digest article. The social media accounts of his sisters, at least the information which is publicly available, make no mention of him. He wasn't enjoying life in Canada and could have wanted to get away, clear his head, or even to start a new life. One of the challenging factors in this theory, as with the last, is that search dogs were not reported to have picked up a scent for Aju. If the canine units didn't find him, suggested Aju's father, then somehow he must have been transported out of that place. If Aju had gotten a lift or hitchhiked along the logging road, then this would tend to make more sense, though we simply don't know how the dogs responded, and one source notes that the gravel logging road in question, mainly used by loggers, had not been heavily travelled recently. Additionally, if someone had genuinely and safely given Aju a lift that day, why haven't they come forward to say so? This would tend to rule out a lift having been given, though one could plausibly argue that the lack of coverage in the case and the possibility of a long-distance truck driver could add to the reasons why. As we noted in the prior theory, Jeff Bangma explained that 5 hours had lapsed between the last sighting of Aju and when the police were contacted, which could have given Aju a huge head start to make a lot of ground if he had indeed chosen to leave of his own accord. We've also noted that officers and colleagues were alleged to have remained in the area overnight calling for Aju, meaning he either couldn't hear them, didn't want to, or was not able to respond, or had already left the area. Bangma also was quoted as confirming that police had no evidence that Aju walked away. As far as we know, nobody saw Aju walk off. Nobody knows what direction he went in. We should also consider that, if Aju left of his own accord, why did he not go back to the camp and collect his belongings? We know from the investigation that he had clothes, his social insurance card, both his Canadian and Nigerian passports, his driver's license, keys, and a weathered black wallet there, as well as, potentially, a phone calling card with which he could have contacted family. It would appear that, for whatever reason, Aju never made it back to camp. If it was truly his intention to leave and start afresh elsewhere, then he could have opted to bypass the camp and head straight for the town, leaving his possessions behind deliberately. In this scenario, though, how did he go unnoticed? It could also be, however, that he encountered a situation which prevented him from returning for his belongings, such as an accident, which we will discuss in more detail later. Another string to this theory that Aju left of his own accord has to go with him not being of sound mind. Aju, being just short of 26, was in the prime age range for young men who develop onset schizophrenia, 16 to 30 years. It has been suggested online, though the information is not verifiable, that some of the people that worked with this dude, quote, that his mind wasn't right. This comment is not further clarified, however, nor backed up with any evidence or personal anecdotes. It is possible that after having left of his own accord, Aju had an accident, such as a fall, which caused a traumatic brain injury or brought on another such mental challenge, such as amnesia or a fugue state. One source online suggests the possibility of subliminal distraction, describing when subtle movements or stimuli in one's peripheral vision are registered subconsciously in the brain, possibly influencing perception and behaviour. In other words, as we've described, something similar to a mental break. Any of this type of situation could have drastic consequences, leading to Aju not knowing his identity, taking off in a state of confusion, ending up elsewhere with no memories or ID, succumbing to the elements, suffering an accident or an animal attack, or even falling victim to opportunistic or pre-planned foul play. The lack of trail complicates this suggestion, however, as with the prior ones we've discussed. Moving on, there is the possibility for an accident to have occurred. One thing I've not heard or read discussed in this case is the possibility of Aju having ended up in a body of water. Although Aju was not known to be under the influence of alcohol or sense-affecting substances of any kind, it is still plausible that he could have fallen into one of the many lakes in the area and either become unconscious or drowned. It was reported that Aju was not familiar with this specific area, and he could have been dehydrated after spending 4 hours waiting for the company bus back to the camp. It is feasible that Aju wandered off to find a source of water, and an accident befell him. If Aju ended up in water, this could explain why the dogs were not reported to have tracked his scent, although one should still have been picked up leading to the water source. In with this theory is the potential for an animal attack. Tree planters discussing the case online have shared their experiences whilst doing the job. One saying, "I saw a cougar on one of those planting blocks 3 years ago, mid-2003. Another one claiming that bears are less than friendly this time of year, as we've discussed. Further research shows that in the area there may also be wolves, coyotes, and snakes. However, A&M Reforestation co-owner Paul Thasuska dismissed the theory of a bear attack, claiming that tree planters have experience in how to deal with the wild animals. The idea that a bear got him is complete bunk. Integra investigations also discounted the possibility of a bear attack, though on what basis is unknown. And finally, we have the possibility of foul play, either premeditated or opportunistic. Aju was no stranger to tree planting, having already completed a season the year prior for the same company, so it's odd that a supervisor would pull him up on the quality of his work, to such a degree that it needed redoing, and doubly odd indeed that after a second planting, they should still allegedly be substandard. Bearing in mind that there should already be standard processes and procedures in place to standardise the tree planter's work. Did the supervisor have a personal problem with Aju? It sounds like tempers were flaring, with onlookers describing the argument as becoming heated, with raised voices. We know that Aju had a bad temper and struggled to contain his rage, having been charged with assault in the past. It is not unreasonable to suspect things may have boiled over and turned physical, resulting in tragedy, either an accidental death or an unintentional or even an intentional death. Nwab Iroaga voiced his fear that a dispute involving Aju may have flared out of control with disastrous consequences, though DS Bangma said that there was no evidence of a connection between Aju's history of violence and his disappearance. There are a number of ways that a foul play scenario could have played out. If it happened in front of witnesses, i.e. the other tree planters, what would their motivation be to remain quiet or even to potentially lie about when Aju was last seen? Many seasonal workers are undocumented. Not that I'm suggesting this to be the case with A&M reforestation in particular, however, but a quick online search will bring up hundreds of results where undocumented workers do not report crimes that they witness or are subject to for fear of deportation or other repercussions. Is it likely that all 15 or so of the crew would remain quiet and for all of this time? Probably not. Then, perhaps after Aju walked away to wait at the road, he was sought out and assaulted in between crews passing by the area. How feasible is this, given that he was allegedly waiting for 4 hours? Is it possible that Aju was hit by one of the work vehicles and killed whilst walking along the road? Either way, there is the issue of removing the body. Aju was a lean man at just over 80 kilos or 180 pounds, but he was 6 feet tall. He would have been difficult to move by one person, and for scent dogs not to have tracked him in the immediate vicinity, he would have to have either been removed from the area in a vehicle, or placed in a body of water, or somewhere else in the brush far enough away that the dogs couldn't trace his scent. Staff did wait 5 hours before reporting him missing, despite having seen him wait for 4 hours, potentially upwards of 10 times that afternoon. So why the delay? It would certainly provide a large window of opportunity for removal of a body and any evidence, and we do know that there were vehicles on site available for staff use at the time. Aju's father said, if the canine units didn't find him, then somehow he must have been transported out of that place. The possibility of foul play, while initially seeming feasible, doesn't appear to hold up to scrutiny though. DS Jeff Bangma said that police had no evidence of foul play. Indeed, he claimed that it had in fact been ruled out, though on what grounds remains unknown. Of note is that there have been suggestions that there have been many Canadian engineering students missing, though I have only been able to identify 2 students, one being McMaster student Chinese citizen Ling Ji Hung, who was located safely in York region by Hamilton Police in 2019, and another being York University student Zabia Afzal, who was sadly found deceased in 2018. Neither of them appeared to be connected in any way to Aju's disappearance. To sum up the theories, Jeff Bangma and Shelley Pastoric explain the possibilities are that somebody did him some harm, or that Aju got mad at the world and wandered away, and that he is in the bush or he is not, or that he got a ride with somebody that we don't know about. adding that the single most crucial question is what happened to Aju between 3:45 and 6 p.m. on the 15th of May 2006. I want to find out what happened by 6 o'clock that day, and whether or not somebody did something criminally wrong in the time leading up to that. That is my main focus. Whatever the scenario, Aju's parents believe that their son has passed away, with Nkechi saying, "I know for sure that my son is not alive." I'm going to leave you now with a description of Aju and some final words from friends, family, and investigators in the case. At the time of his disappearance, Aju was described as a 25-year-old black male with a dark complexion and an athletic build. He was 183 centimetres, or 6 feet tall, and weighed approximately 83 kilos, or about 180 pounds. He had black hair and dark eyes that have been described both as black and brown. He was last seen wearing a green hooded camouflage sweatshirt, blue denim jeans, brown leather running shoes, a black woolen toque hat, and a black brimmed tilly hat. Aju is a Canadian citizen of Nigerian origin with a Nigerian accent. If seen today, Aju would be 42 years old. It is clear that Aju touched the lives of many people in Nigeria, with friends of his commenting on a social media group set up in his honour. Caleb Solomon Harid said, "That's terrible what the family of Aju is going through. I saw the video and the father was close to tears because of his son's disappearance. If we put our heads together, we can come up with a solution and bring closure to Aju's family. By God's grace, he is still alive." Jane Ada, fellow member of the Igbo community and criminology graduate, says, "There is a good chance that Aju may still be alive, so we should not give up yet. I saw the pamphlet that my parents brought home from a Nigerian convention, and what I saw was a handsome face and a young man who had his entire life ahead of him. Let's get together and see how we can help push this case far till we get something tangible or find those involved." Patricia Chapman wrote, "I hope one day we will get answers and hopefully the truth on what happened to Aju." Nidu Aiku says, "Aju, if you're out there, I hope you're alright. I remember being at your house before your trip and thought we were going to see each other again. But I heard the news back home and I thought it was just a rumour, but it's real, and I just don't understand how this could happen." Valentine Kanu offers a touching tribute to the Iroagas. "Aju and I were childhood friends back in the day. I still think I am his first friend. I've known Aju for 22 years. Aju is a man of few words, because even as a kid he was. Let his family be strong, because he certainly left footprints in the sands of time. No one else will ever understand the misery this has caused you. Please do find faith and fortitude to bear this." Omari Jabari says, "He was a true soldier, I can tell you that much. Iroaga is a warrior in the Igbo community. His father is chief of his village. One thing for sure, God does not sleep, and what is in the dark must come to light." Friend Delmaribe Young, who created the social media group for Aju, says, "We grew up together as kids before he went to Canada. How did this happen so fast? I don't understand. People dying to know where you are, but I don't care. All I want to know is if you're okay and alive, because to me, that is the most important of all. Aju, if you can see all of these messages and feel you need someone you can trust or need someone to talk to, give me a call." His contact details will be provided in the description box below. This is a case where fingers can be pointed in many directions and blame apportioned here and there, but some wise words are offered by Ola or Yellowo. I don't even think we should blame anyone for that matter. It'll only aggravate people more. What's done is done. At the end of the day, Aju is still missing. Try not to worry about not being aware for the past years. Let's put all our energy into finding Aju. Let's worry more about how you can help his family. I think they've been through much, and frankly, I believe they've heard the blames being pushed back and forth enough times. Any other ideas as to how we can help would be great. Any other ideas as to how we can create more awareness here in Toronto or anywhere will be appreciated. Yaya Fat reiterates this message, saying, "All this blame won't get anyone anywhere. Whatever the case may be, the best thing and only thing people should be doing is spreading awareness and trying to give this boy's family some closure." Perhaps a key message we should take from this case is summed up in the comments of McMaster University students, with comments such as, "Remember, this could happen to anyone. Please do not be quiet about it." And Luim Ogbeselassie, who says, "This is unbelievable. Something really needs to be done. This is one of our peers. It could be any one of us." The Iroagas are still pushing for an inquest into the case. Marlys Edwardh of the legal firm retained by the Iroaga family explains potently, "People do not just vanish. How, where, when, and by what means Aju died are still open questions that require answers. The McGuinty government must launch an investigation into this mysterious case. There are too many unanswered questions. Whilst DS Jeff Bangma still considers the pivotal question to be, what happened to Aju between 3:45 and 6 o'clock on the 15th of May 2006? DS Bangma assures the Iroaga family that he and his partner intend to bring some sort of finality to the case. "I don't think the focus right now is on speed. It's on doing the investigation right. That's where we are now, whilst Aju's family continue to live through the ambiguous grief in the wake of their son's disappearance." Nwab explained, "We seldom discuss it with each other. It just creates more misery. Sometimes I blame myself." And Nkechi added, "For me, I am always, every time of the day, praying to God. This situation is a mystery. I can't handle it anymore. I need that closure so that my mind will rest." There are various methods of contact for anyone who wishes to provide information on Aju's case, including the Ontario Provincial Police Superior East Detachment, Crime Stoppers Canada, and the National Centre for Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains. As of 2007, the family of Aju Iroaga is offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the whereabouts of Aju, and there was a trust fund available, Justice for Aju Iroaga Trust Fund at the Royal Bank of Canada, accepting donations for the search and legal fees. Aju's father also left his email address, which still appears on the family's website, though since Nwab may have since passed, I'm not sure if the account is still monitored. Friend Delmaribe Young also left a contact telephone number for Aju himself to make contact. On Sunday, April 20th, 2008, Uzoma Ugbona posted a poem for Aju entitled "Second Wind." The tornado came and unzipped a hole wider than our tumultuous outbursts. It swallowed you, our burdened rememberings, into the hopelessness of hope. It was the Simon who scraped your roots away from our fingers and buried you, unsung, deep within the soiled earth, and we are laid waste, our cries cracking the shine of invincible yesterdays, disintegrating our foreseen future. Forgive me, we couldn't last in the Levanta, for its political levitating meant gravitating towards the dissipated shreds of sorrow in which we cradled your transparent body safely. Sirocco, we screamed. We danced you into the soft earth, but you were in the dust, flying off the ground of our feet. Had I been a cane, as your blood soaked the sands, I still would not be able to count all the leaves and search all the trees for an answer, for your voice. But in the last breath, I catch myself and see the demarcation of your smile upon my cheek. You live again, in the rainfall crashing through, the cool wind stroking skin, and in the tremble of her body, I have my second wind in you. It's time for the second wind in Aju's case. If you have any information relating to the disappearance of Aju Iroaga, please use the contact information in the description box below to get it to those who can act on it. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Aju Iroaga. Take care of yourselves and each other. Until next time. Bye.